Ethical Hacking Countermeasures, Secure Network Operating Systems and Infrastructures, second edition. That's kind of a mouthful. But this is the Wi-Fi's, where we'll learn about wireless networking, different types of Wi-Fi, standards, SSIDs, WEPs and WEP, and why maybe it's not equivalent to a wire. And then better, WPA and its descendants, how to hack wireless networks, cracks, WEP, the generic tools any Joe can use, and steps to secure it. If we have time, maybe next week, I'll see if I can bring in my Wi-Fi pineapple and we'll see how much mischief we can cause with it. So even though it depends solely on quality cryptography and hope and the properties of the electromagnetic spectrum, everybody seems to be doing this Wi-Fi thing now. I know I am. I used to think that the next house I moved into, I'd insist on having Cat 5e or Cat 6 run everywhere, and now I'm kind of getting ambivalent about that because the Wi-Fi is pretty okay. So sometimes called WLAN, although seldom in my experience, a wireless network is a local area network, just like the one you're probably plugged into right now. You're probably plugged into it right now if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're sitting over there. And it's easy. You don't have to run wires everywhere. You don't have to know anything about crimping. You don't have to know anything about RJ45 connectors that aren't technically called RJ45 connectors. It sometimes costs you more money, although if you had to go back into an old building and add wiring ex post facto, that's going to be a lot more expensive. It is lower reliability. I had a place with a cheap microwave for a while, and every time somebody would microwave a bag of popcorns, your Netflix would break. That's not cool. It is somewhat slower. The fastest of the wireless protocols are faster than cheap switches, and you are broadcasting all of your stuff all over the place, so inherently it is less secure than having a wire. I don't know if anybody's ever called a wireless hacker a whacker outside of this. I mean, they've called them that, I'm sure, but like specifically describing their wireless hacking efforts. It does enable you to maybe get a toehold into a network in a parking lot, which is a new thing. War chalking, maybe not a thing. I mean, I've seen it described. I've never like walked down a street in a busy metropolitan area and seen war hacking symbols laying, or war chalking symbols laying around. War driving and war flying, though, are definitely a thing. Google does it just cause. They check out wireless networks while they're driving around making their Google Street Maps. I don't know if they've been disabused of that practice or not, but I know it did cause a stir when people figured out their wireless networks were getting mapped. Ask away.
Just a side note on that.
Yeah?
As I recall, Google's justification for the whole Let's Map wireless networks was because they could use that to get a better idea of where someone was for the geolocation stuff on the phones.
Yep. If they know that if you're connected to Rosama.Wi-Fi, you're somewhere within 200 feet of my house, and that helps you pin it down.
You can't even see that from where you are.
Right. And I appreciate the argument. If we had slightly different eyes and could see into the 5 gigahertz spectrum, and we could see that these signals were being broadcast into the world, we wouldn't think twice about it. But since they're invisible wireless mystery waves, people get a little uppity about it. Whole country of Germany had a great big giant problem with the whole Google Map thing, and pushed the technology forward apparently for blurring out houses and faces and all that stuff. Yeah, they're easy to hack. They're hard to defend. Once you let somebody in to your wireless network, they're in your wireless network. But there are mitigations for that. You can set them up peer-to-peer. There was, do you remember that Windows virus that was running around free high-speed internet, and it would turn on the wireless networking on a Windows machine, and then when you connected, it would exploit Windows vulnerabilities to try and propagate itself. It was running around airports for a while. But yeah, let's everybody communicate with everybody. No AP required. There's extensions. And, so you've got a wireless network or a wired network, and off of it you hang an access point, and now you've got a wireless network. If you've got a large-scale deployment or even a big house these days, you might consider having multiple access points so that people can, if you've got a big old house that doesn't quite fit on the screen, you might have a wireless access point over on this side, and you have a wireless access point over on this side, so everybody over here can get Wi-Fi, and so can everybody over here. And then we might forget that so can the guy who's over here, who's not in the house. And then connecting different networks LAN to LAN is a use. The one we're not talking about a ton here is that wireless links are also used to link up distant networks. There's a product called GigaFiber wireless links that we used in broadcasting a lot that were basically 802.11g directional antennas, and they worked over the span of miles. The River House building was linked back to the studio with one of those. So that's cool, and it's nice to be able to like walk around a building and not have to re-authenticate. There's the wireless network that's part of the hacking network that I tend to be authenticated to when I'm in this classroom, but when I leave this classroom, I have to go authenticate to the staff network or to the GRCC wireless network. So it is super convenient when you can just walk around and your laptop hands off seamlessly from one network to the next. You only have to authenticate once if you've got that set up right. It is cheaper to, and I talked about this a hot second ago, that it's cheaper to set up wireless than it is to rewire a building. I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a large building. I imagine any building where you had to lay down Ethernet, it's going to be cheaper just to put a hotspot in the middle of it. And then this somewhat includes cellular networks, although they're a different beast, but only a slightly different beast. And for better or worse, it makes it easier for devices to share data. And sometimes that's intentional, and sometimes it's unintentional, which could be bad. It is somewhat disingenuous to say there are no physical protections for wireless networks. There's a volume meter on that signal that can be turned up and down, so you can dial back the signals. You can build Faraday cages around your home if you want to keep all the Wi-Fi inside. So, I mean, there are physical options out there. Data sharing, unintentional data sharing is risky, I suppose. And so usually it's since Wi-Fi is designed as a communication protocol, it's pretty easy to pick it out. So some of the more obscure signals, so if I was the kind of person who had spent many evenings sitting on top of his roof pointing one of those gigawire transceivers at the local cell tower trying to suss out what exactly they were saying, wireless networks are super easy to figure out what kind of protocol they're talking, because they're designed to be figured out. Now sometimes the encryption's a pain, but they're generally easy enough to figure out. So all of these generally fall under 802.11, and you've probably, if you've looked at like the back of a box that was selling you a router, it probably did all of the old protocols plus some of the new protocols. And as that went along, they added channels, and channels just being, we're only going to use a specific part of a specific frequency. Then the Wi-Fi really kind of took off with B. G was like B but faster. I added some security. We added a lot of throughput with N. AC tends to be what people are selling routers with now, but there's new standards in the works. And I'll leave as an exercise to the viewer and student Googling wireless standards. And there's a bunch of them in the works. The whole 5G thing is based in part, at least, on wireless standards. 8.2.16 is that WiMAX thing that helps people who are living in the boonies get access to internet. If you drive in a rural area, oftentimes you'll see signs, like cheap ones generally, because these tend to be sort of small and home businesses, but there'll be a sign in the road that says, if you can see this sign, you can get high-speed internet. And it's usually a WiMAX setup where there's somebody's got access to a tower, and atop that tower is a transmitter, and they make their money by setting up homes with receivers for that signal and using and giving them high-speed internet. Really, for a lot of people, that's the best hope for broadband to rural areas, is something like WiMAX. And then Bluetooth, although occasionally being a security disaster, is how this mouse is talking to my computer right now, and how this pen talks to my computer. So fast enough, but it is intended to replace the wire that is not on this pen and the wire that is not on this mouse. It does its job adequately. It's pretty okay for audio. Some of the new audio standards are pretty good. Here's a breakdown on 802.11a. It's 40 megahertz wide, so it's X amount of bandwidth. 40 million hertz in the 5 gigahertz range. Supposedly it'll get up to 54 megs. Got to be line of sight. Isn't in the same range as B and G. One of the problems with any transmission of radio waves is that mass absorbs it. So your radio wave hits something, and that something absorbs the energy and is slightly hotter because of it, or makes sound, or some other thing, which is bad. It's using a single carrier, and it uses a delayed spread spectrum, meaning it spreads itself across. Spectrum's easier to think about in terms of a rainbow, so it's spread across colors, if that helps. B is a little better. Now we've got 20 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz. It's only 11 megabits per second, but actually works out to something like 5.9 if it's TCP, or 7.1 if it's UDP. There are natural speed differences in those two protocols because of headers and such. In a city, though, you can get 8 clicks out of it. That's a long ways. And because it is a lower frequency range, so it's 2.4 gigahertz instead of 5 gigahertz, it doesn't get sucked up by walls and stuff as easily. And then I mentioned this earlier, I had a cheap microwave that liked to make interference. And although I haven't had one of these since the 90s, I understand wireless telephones also operate in this 2.4 unlicensed range and screw things up. And there's other toys, like one of my kids had one of those robot remote control dinosaurs for Christmas one year, and that screwed with the Wi-Fi. So those are a thing. G, same frequency, more bandwidths, transfer rates somewhere around call it 25 megabits a second. Backwards compatibility is cool. It's got the same kind of limitations as 802.11b because it's basically an upgrade of the standard. And then if you were trying to mix and match your networks, the 802.11b stuff would slow down the 802.11g stuff. So that's not great. I uses the same sort of networking, but adds improved encryption, which we like. So now you can do extensible authentication protocol and have a server. You can use this robust security network to keep track of who's associated with what. Now we're doing cipher block chaining. Don't freak out because the word blockchain is in there. To keep track of the message authentication, providing the confidentiality and integrity and origin authentication, so you know who did it, you know you got the whole packet, and you know it came from where it said it was going to come from. N adds, MIMO adds throughput over 100 megabits. more dialing in of the physical layer and access to the medium. Radios are getting better all the time, and so the 802.11 standard takes advantage of that. They up the different types of performance mode. I think this is where technologies like beaming come in, where we have multiple radios that are dialing in on a single receiver, and those kind of things lead to faster transfer. Trying to figure out if you finished up there. I have this picture from like 1996 where I have a Motorola flip phone, a Windows CE fold-out personal data assistant. I think that's it. And like, I probably posted to MySpace or something like, "This is the office of the future." And it was when we had started doing this personal area networking thing where you could have devices on you talking about you, to you. So these days that's like smartwatches. A lot of people are getting, text message updates on their iWrist. There's a pretty sweet heads-up display for bicyclists that is basically a little LCD screen in the corner of your field of vision telling you how fast you're cycling, and it'll do wayfinding and stuff. So those wireless personal networks are a thing now. It's the physical and data link layer on the OSI model. So if this is physical, it's actually upside down, and that's data link. So there's the actual radio frequencies and the single base band you're using. The manager for the link sets up the connection between your devices, and then there's a logical link control and an application protocol that defines how these devices connect and how do they make friends with each other and how do they automatically reconnect. I talked a little bit at length about WiMAX already. Basically, it's point to multi-point for broadband. So you've got that tower, and on top of it is the point, and then around it you have the houses that are their customers who can phone home and connect to the internet over that. So if you're in the middle of nowhere, up to 75 megabits per second over that link is a pretty big deal. There is also a mobile version of this where you've got a vehicle that needs internet access, and it's got to have an antenna that as well. We had played around with the idea of using that for satellite trucks, if they couldn't get to the sky because it was overcast or whatever, but it could get to one of these WiMAX services around town. There's pretty good coverage in downtown Grand Rapids, so it was an option. And then there's a bunch of cellular-based protocols that differ over which country you happen to be located in, which version of technology are on the towers that you're talking to, including CDMA and CDPD and GSM and GRMS, and Powerline Ethernet keeps getting talked about but never seems to happen. 802.1x is a technology that not enough people look into. And then BSS and IBSS are things.
I actually did encounter someone with a Powerline Ethernet set up.
Really?
Yeah, just in their home.
So was it Powerline Ethernet just inside the house?
I believe so.
The phone, the like jacks that you plug into your wall to make Ethernet, those have been a thing for a while. But when I think Powerline Ethernet, that's the lines that go from like long distances. And
okay, I wasn't sure that's
for a long time, the government was pouring money into that, research into those, because one of the goals of society really is to deliver electricity to rural areas and broadband to rural areas. And we did a pretty good job of delivering electricity, You know, they've run power lines just about everywhere there's a house. And if you want to put up a new house, oftentimes it's reasonable to get power to even very rural places. But we haven't figured out a way to do that with broadband, except with the exception of WiMAX, and even that's got limitations. You've got a 30-mile range around that tower. So until you do towers every 30 miles, it's probably further with the actual towers because you're a couple hundred feet up in the air. But so that power line Ethernet's been a pipe dream for a long time. Like if we could get Ethernet or network to go across those power lines, we've already laid out the infrastructure to have it there. But there's a lot of interference, and high power, high voltage electricity is naturally an interference creating medium, so they're not having a ton of luck with that. So all of these things use something like an SSID to communicate, something that the service set identifier, something that tells you which wireless LAN is which. There's no security involved in it. They're in the clear. And if the network is off, then it's secret. But if the network is off, it's not particularly useful. So as soon as you turn it on,
the closest I ever came to getting anything like that, this was actually, I'd set up not to broadcast just because why not. This was for something where I had to have WDP enabled. So I made sure to turn the transmit power as low as I could.
Yeah, that's a way to do it. The turning it off is...
You basically have to be right outside my window to connect.
And if somebody's creeping right outside your window, you probably have bigger problems than your wireless access.
And there was only one device that ever used it, which didn't even use it very often.
The drone wireless hacking thing is kind of an interesting concept of flying a drone right up to the network that you want to get into and parking it and just using it as a relay point.
Yeah.
And then you can do miracles with good amplifiers, like a high-powered transmitter and a high-gain receiver can do amazing things.
Yep, and the proverbial Pringles can trick.
Yeah, I had a guy at the Trends conference showing off. It wasn't a Pringles can, but it was an actual high-gain antenna, one that's probably illegal to use in this fashion, pointed across Lake Michigan from the northwestern part of the state, picking up wireless access points in Wisconsin. So I mean, it goes a long way when you want it to. So to join a wireless network, first you have to associate with it. That will require an SSID, although if you sit around sniffing long enough, it will come across the wire. You can share a key beforehand for authentication, and the 802.1x authentication process looks like this. So instead of a three-way handshake, we're up to 4. You've got your laptop, the AP you're trying to connect to, and probably an authentication server. So you ask to connect, the access point says to the authentication server, hey, we want to talk. They trade PMKs, keys, and then they try to request the association, and then the 4-way handshake starts. Pick a nonce, and a sequence gets sent from the access point to the notebook or the laptop or whatever. The nonce sequence plus an MIC, the MIC plus the sequence and the nonce go back. An incremented version of that goes the other way, and if all of those things agree, you're connected to an access point and you're off and running doing network things. And that's the depth to which they want us to break it down. I guess if you really, really wanted to dig into it, the RFCs have the actual implementation stuff in there. Although, is Wi-Fi one of those ones where you have to pay to get to the? You might have to pay to get to the protocol. So bad things, if you have the default SSID that's not, since it's so easy to find, it's really just a very minor stumbling block to a determined attacker. Turning off the beaconing, setting your base station to not advertise the names of the network again, it will protect you from the most casual of adversaries. But usually they broadcast what they're doing, and anybody can sit there and capture the SSID if they're determined. So it's not really helping you out a ton. And since it's wireless, you can play all these games. You can impersonate another station. Since it's wireless, you can throw up interference. We had this problem all the time with the guys who run Mishwave wanting to use all of the Wi-Fi channels on top of Bridgewater, and we thought we should be able to use a couple. It was chaos and anarchy. And if you mess around long enough, you wind up in court talking about who's got the right to use what frequencies where. You can disassociate workstations and basically disconnecting a participant in the network from the network, and then they have to re-authenticate. If you think, aha, my wireless access point supports MAC address filtering, so what I'll do is I'll have each individual device supply its MAC address, and then I will only allow MAC addresses that I know about on my network. That's great and all, but it's like 2 lines to change your MAC address on most Linux distributions, assuming you have the kind of wireless card that supports that sort of thing. It tends to go across the wire in clear text, so you can sit around listening for one, and when one goes across the wire, you can say, that's the one I'm going to use. And now you become that device, and then they're allowed to access the wireless access point. That's a bummer. We talked a little bit about this. Anything with a radio transmitter needs an antenna. There are omnis, which send your radio frequency everywhere. Then there are directional. Sometimes there are unidirectional antennas, which are focused in a particular direction. We often made use of unidirectional wireless antennas to connect remote sites to one another. And then a super cantenna, the Pringles can trick where you use a device to extend the range of a network very, very far, basically using a high gain amplifier to receive low power signals. And you can get in all kinds of trouble with that. The FCC's probably got like 5 vans that drive around the country looking for people who are abusing their signals. I almost had a run-in with the FCC at Tribune. We had Sony sold back a bunch of wireless frequency that we used for wireless microphones, and it turned out that it was in the spectrum that the cell tower next to us was using. And we got a little visit from the engineering staff at Verizon saying, would you please turn off whatever it is that's destroying our internet connections from 6 to 9 or whenever it was we were doing news. Nobody wins those. So WEPs, wireless access points. There's one sitting over in that corner. You probably have one in your house. They're used for just about everything. And the access point is what lets wireless devices access other wireless devices. So ideally, you want to minimize the amount of signal getting to places where you don't want the signal to be. The wireless APs must be relatively close to the devices you want to use. Ideally, they should be indoors, although there are situations where they can't be. I've stayed at a handful of, in fact, every marina I've ever stayed at in the last 5 years had outdoor Wi-Fi. So it's a thing. Put your APs in your lofts. So that beacon frame thing. Every now and then that SSID gets spit out, and especially if like in a home setup or even in a business setup, if you're going to have to plug any of the Internet of Crap into your wireless network, The disadvantage of having to type the ID of your wireless network in a bunch of times, in the crappy interface on a television or the crappy interface on some IoT camera or whatever, that problem probably outweighs the advantages you gain by not broadcasting your SSID. When you do that, sometimes your networks are called closed, but yeah, they're not secure, and you can sit around sniffing the wireless and eventually find it. These will get you arrested. If you go out to the eBays, or plenty of places on the internet will sell you a low power radio frequency jammer that will keep phones and wireless devices and just about anything from talking to anything else. Your phone will sit there, and if you've ever been to the bowels of this building where you are outside of cellular range, I think I'm okay right now. Yeah, I've got 3 bars. But your phone will try really hard to reacquire a signal, and as it does so, it will kill its battery. These may be morally justifiable in movie theaters.
Yeah, not really.
Just hit that switch, everybody's phone turns off. All their batteries fry out. But you get to watch the movie in peace.
And then you have the problem of need to make an emergency call, say, because you're at that one showing in the Dark Knight.
Right. Boy, if you were at that one showing of The Dark Knight, if that guy had brought a phone jammer with him.
Yeah, fun fact though, it's actually still illegal for even local police to have these things.
Oh, to do jamming? Yeah, I wouldn't see why they'd have the right to do it.
Yeah, the FCC is very... They're not happy with anyone trying to use this stuff, no matter how much you think.
Even when you do it on accident. They're not big fans. Somebody, there was a story in Security Now this week about Bitcoin mining equipment.
Oh, yeah.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, one of those stupid rigs that wound up becoming a jamming device, possibly by accident, possibly because it was modified in such a way that it caused that, possibly because it was screwed up from one chip. No one really knows. And either way, the guy's a dick, so who cares?
He was mining Bitcoin, looking to make that fortune. It apparently had racks of it, of these particular eBay ASICs that mine Bitcoins.
That's why, like I said,
man, you be hating on
that. It's more than
the blockchain harder than anybody I know.
It's.
Do you ever?
There is any advantage that it might offer has already existed without the need to completely waste energy and more immediate relevance to me, drive up prices for video cards to absurd levels.
Yeah,
I think seeing what did to video card prices is what really jump-started my hatred.
I've been holding off on going from my 970 to a 1080 just because of the insane Bitcoin burst on GPUs.
Before I was content with just rolling my eyes. Now it's just active.
Now it's actually getting into my wife. Did you ever listen to a guy named Daniel Messler? He does a podcast called Unsupervised Learning. He's got an interesting piece he wrote this week, talking about security people just hating on the IoT and hating on the blockchain, and he provides a nice counterpoint to your point of view. You might want to look it up sometime when you're ready to get your gallbladder really inflamed.
That's the thing, though. The problem is the whole idea of a ledger, the immutability and constantly tracks changes. We've had that for years. I mean, GitHub is technically counts as that.
Without the security that cryptography provides. I mean, GitHub tries to do that, but it's not like there's a hash of every commit ever made to everything.
No, but the point is it's impossible to run. The point is it still keeps the record. You can't really revert. You just have in that you can't delete a past commit. You just have to do a commit that is the exact, it's identical to the previous.
Takes you back a step.
the original commit they referred to is still on record.
But not like mathematically ensured to be on record. We just, because GitHub hopefully is working right.
You only need it because the part where it's where you can't actually control there's no control for replication is the thing. Then and that the full ledger needs to be available, like hundreds of thousands of different people, all from whenever they want to, and it absolutely has to be identical.
Because it is hard to keep things identical for hundreds of thousands of people simultaneously.
That's the main reason it needs it.
All right, let's talk about why WEP is garbage instead of why blockchain is.
I'm good with that.
So, wired equivalent privacy. Yeah. And if, with the caveats you mentioned earlier, if the wire was accessible from 20 meters away from the wire, it would be true. But the idea was it was supposed to stop eavesdropping. Although nowadays, double-clicking on a program is enough to break WEP open. So I guess that's easier than finding a network tap and plugging into it, and then keeping the number of unauthorized users off of your networks. But, and I think it is, this is an IEEE joint, isn't it?
There we go. As apparently there was an attack that was at the time capable of getting into a network in under a minute.
Yeah, it's
using
pretty.
A 1.7 took like 3 seconds on a 1.7 gigahertz Pentium pen.
Yeah, it's pretty pro.
It was 2007 when this was released.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so it's been over a decade since WP has been rendered completely useless.
And yet every router still has a checkbox where you can run it. So my gripe with WEP is that it is one of the, I think it is an IEEE standard, and I think it is one of those standards that is not academically reviewed, not publicly reviewed. You have to pay to get access to the specifications, and it's a lot of money. So like only manufacturers of wireless stuff do that. It's got problems for the word jump. I don't remember the specifics of it at this point, but it's a useful toy protocol for cryptography classes now, because you do take it apart and say, here's where they screwed up. They're saying a quarter to a third are still using it, but it's still available in most of them. I updated my router last night, and WEP is still one of the drop-downs. So because of the way they screwed up RC4, we take plain text, zeros and ones, and we XOR it against our data. What, do you think I can XOR this early in the morning? Or they're the same, or they're different. Or they're different, right? So that's 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. Either that or it's completely backwards and I just X-anded them. But that's the idea. And it's pretty simple and pretty easy to reverse that if you know what you're looking for. It's not great. We initialize that with very small number of bits. You can attack it using plain text. You can attack it using a dictionary. It's easy to DOS. If you record the key streams, you can fix them. You can go back through and decrypt them later. And there's no like centralized key management mechanism. So all in all, it's a great example of all the things you can do wrong when building your cryptographic system, which is why it shows up in a lot of like Crypto 101 classes. So to define the term we just used a slide ago, the IV, the initialization vector, is how you randomize your initial key stream. Those don't have to be unique in WEP, and oftentimes a busy AP will start using the initialization vector from a couple of hours ago, reusing it over and over again. So it basically would be like you were required to change your password every minute, but then you were allowed to reuse the passwords, which would get you into trouble. So first you authenticate. You connect, you ask to authenticate. The AP will send a challenge to the laptop or whatever that's connecting. Once you can successfully decrypt that and get the challenge value, that basically means that you've authenticated. If there's a shared key, now you send a challenge text. The receiving station decrypts it using the same key to prove that you've both got the same password. Then you associate, which is basically just agreeing on a shared key for the rest of this deal. However, nobody bothered to write down any method for distributing shared keys, so that would have been useful. RC4 was supposed to be one-time cipher, and instead it's reused multiple times. I think I just neo-syllogized multiply. If you can sit there and just sniff, eventually you can come up with the web keys using any of these fine hacking tools available at an internet near you. AirSnort, WebCrack, and DWeb utils. Different vendors handled key generation differently, so not only is it messed up, but it's messed up in a variety of ways depending on who set it up. And then how you define when those keys get changed, those introduce all kinds of vulnerabilities. If you want a deeper dive into it, Dan Bone's Crypto 101 class from Stanford is free on Coursera, and he does a deep dive into all the things that are jacked up with the cryptography, which is an interesting academic process to figure out. So eventually, industry figured out that was screwed up, and they called some people who knew some stuff about cryptography and said, hey, could we make this better? And they got most of it right the first time out. They tried WPA, Wi-Fi Protected Access. We added this, that's where the 11i showed up. Now we fixed the whole initialization vector problem, which is nice, but still DOSable. You could send out a bunch of crappy packets, corrupt packets, inject packets. And part of that is the nature of wireless communication. You can jam a signal if you want to. WPA2 has been working out pretty good so far. No giant problems, at least none that I think the broad security community is aware of, or at least that I'm aware of, yet. So pretty close to wired networks. 256-bit pre-shared key, so a password from 8 to 64 bytes long, or a short passphrase, something less than 20 bytes. If it's too short, you can bring it down and subject it to an offline dictionary attack. So that's a problem. Long keys are good. You can also do this whole evil twin attack. So you can take a wireless access point, not necessarily homemade. Hack5 makes very fine products that just pretends to be an access point and gathers as much information from the users as you want. The college is getting better about this, but their old login used to be like not secure, not even HTTPS, and you'd authenticate to the access point with your Active Directory username and password. Just all kinds of bad. So TKIP and LEAP were attempts to eliminate problems inside of WEP by doing things like key mixing, rekeying, changing the key we're using more frequently, and throwing a little message integrity check on the end of it. So how we picked our initialization vector, how we made sure our message was integral, rekeying every packet, having a larger initialization vector, and then actually managing the keys was good. Here's how that looks. You create a temporal key, you mix the key around. Now you've got a second key, you've got a web initialization vector, that RC4 and the key. Out comes your ciphertext. And again, if you want a genuine deep dive, sit through Bones class. It's free and it was pretty good. The lightweight extensible authentication protocol. Again, proprietary and closed source. Not that I'm a complete open source Nazi, but when you don't expose cryptography to the light of public inspection, it really is one of those things where many eyes make the bugs shallow. But it gives you username and password to a Radius server. It does implement IEEE 802.1x, which is also what's used for LAN port access on network switches. Again, ones that are set up properly. As Leap goes ahead and breaks most of that. It deauthenticates users and then watches them when they reauthenticate. So that's a fun way to troll a network and to learn things about it. But it's a step ahead of web. So war walking and war driving are when you go around picking up info about wireless networks that you stumble across. War flying could be a human in a helicopter, but these days more likely to be a drone with a wireless access point on it. And then war chalking was this nonsense where people would draw secret symbols with chalk on buildings and in areas that would tell you that there was an open wireless access point or whatever, which I guess at this point feels to me like a fun bit of hacker trivia, but not much else. So for hacking them, first one would find a wireless network, and a pen tester obviously would probably be assigned, oh, this is our building, go forth, picking that out, figuring out what kind of network it is, and if you get lucky and it's running WEP, then you can spend 30 seconds cracking the WEP key, and then you're on the network. There are occasional vulnerabilities in Bluetooth that allow a mobile application or a remote device to gain access to someone's phone. Occasionally you can man in the middle or eavesdrop. It's all kinds of easy to DOS a wireless network, but it tends to be a loud sort of attack. So you can fire off a phone jammer or a wireless jammer or whatever, but those are easy to triangulate using a little physics and a little math and a couple of radios. But if your signal is here, all I need to know is signal strength here and then signal strength here. And if I know that distance, I can figure out where you are. That's why they drive those little trucks around when they're looking for pirate radio stations. Although I don't think pirate radio stations are a thing anymore, because you can just shoutcast or whatever. You can attack the data link, you can attack the network. So by throwing bad packets or bad frames, you can do all kinds of naughtiness. Then once connected, it's hard to tell the difference between who is and who is not supposed to be on the network. Quick TCP/IP review. And if there's no authentication happening, no validation or verification or VPNing or IPsec going on, well then IPv4 just kind of hands packets off, does its job, and moves things around the networks. So you're essentially trusted. So you can actively or passively crack web. There's a bunch of automated tools that'll do that for you, several of which come inside of your local Kali distribution. There's a bunch of different attempts you can do, types of attacks you can do. You can look at the pads and then try and decrypt the packets which have that padding. So you can look at, packets have to be X size, so the pad will be data packet, or packets required size minus data will leave you some padding. And then if you look at those, you can figure out what's going on. I'm trying to think where I did this last. I think I did it in the Linux programming class, or the Linux scripting class. There's a way you can XOR back out a password, especially if you can choose the plain text that goes across. You can slow things down and send a bit at a time. There's all kinds of options. Yeah, let's do an XOR, right? Same as 0, different as 1. So there's a breakdown of what your key stream looks like, and this is basically an XOR truth table. Almost. You could have if you had a 1 and a 0, now you've got a truth table. So that's like all the math you need to know to be a cryptographer. If you can do XOR, you are ready to rock and roll with cryptography. Until you want to do the elliptical curve stuff. Then you're going to have to know a little trig. But anyway, tools exist to do that for you, so you don't even have to know that much mathematics. If you can stuff a 802.11 device onto the network, you can become a rogue access point and cause all sorts of trouble. There are tools that will do that for you. You can sit around, sniff the air, see what the name of the local wireless network that you want to impersonate is, and then be an access point on it. And then you've got an ideal position from which to start your man-in-the-middling. There's a bunch of tools for stumbling onto wireless networks. Basically, they just record what they see in the air and tell you about them. There's one available for whichever operating system you want to use. Retina is even a pro tool that does that. Some of these tools should start being more and more familiar, things that you will use over and over. Even the Microsoft Network Monitor sniffs the network for you. There's a pretty view of OmniPeak's nice dashboard showing you what wireless networks are out there. Good old Wireshark, which is capable of examining just about any protocol that's capable of going over a network. There's a bunch of tools, like you can buy hardware tools these days that do wireless network scanning if you want to spend a bunch of money on something that's hard to update, but will look cool. What did we learn today? We learned all about WEP and WAP and 802.11s, the different types of wireless networks that were out there, a bunch of crappy standards, a couple of good ones, what an SSID was, the access point, why WEP is garbage, and why it makes for a useful example of what not to do, WPA, how they get hacked, how they get cracked, tools that are out there, and how you might secure them. I guess turning down the volume is your best bet these days. Not a lot of other options out there. And that, as they say, is that.